So friends, we are in the middle of the discussion on Marge Piercy, the American progressive poet, and Dr. Chabajaz has already told us about the main feature of her writing, which is criticism of the society, criticism of the social structure, criticism of the power dynamic. She is using that word very, very significantly, and now she would be extending her argument further to cover more areas about life and the areas about what she called power dynamics or even poetic excellence. So over to you.
Thank you, Professor Prakash. So yes, I wanted to introduce in fact Marge Piercy as a kind of a die-hard political activist, and a kind of a firebrand feminist, because she was involved in various political movements of the 1960s, and 1960s being this kind of a decade where a lot of student protests were happening, women were coming out. Already the first, and this is the moment of the second wave feminism also. So, she's a part of all these activities. So she was a part of the anti-Vietnam War protests that were taking shape, that were constantly there in America, and she was a part of these movements. She also stood up for the rights of women to a kind of a legal abortion. Again, environmental issues, also those of class and culture, these are issues that are after her heart. And you find that Marge Piercy constantly works on these issues. Also, she espoused the cause of Marxism and was deeply, moved by the plight of ordinary people, which made her poetry very intense and personal. As I've already discussed, how the ordinary people get reflected in her sensibility, in her poetry. I'll be taking that further, with at least two more poems that we can look at. But she believed that women had to take to the streets to fight for their rights. That was also a very important concern of hers. And she said that I want my works to be available to the people and they should be of use to the people. So in a way, she was writing poetry as kind of sharing her ideas of things that she had learned, of things that she had realized and become aware of. Those are the kind of ideas that she wanted to share with fellow women or fellow writers, or you could say just, ordinary people who were dear to her. So again, this also comes from a fact that she had felt very lonely when she was growing up. She was the first person in her family who could get a seat in a college. Nobody went to college before her, and she worked hard to get scholarships. She also won the Hopwood Award for Poetry and Fiction in 1957, and after that she never looked back really. So this is the kind of an evolution of this kind of poet, and 1960s onwards she was constantly bringing out one collection of poetry after another. She has to her credit close to 20 books of poetry really, and another close to 20 novels. She's written her memoir is available. She's also written books, non-fiction books. So I think she's just continuously only been writing, because each year her first collection came out in 1968, Breaking Camp, and then there's another collection in 1969, then in 1973, two collections in 1973, Barbie Doll, from where I wanted to read one of the poems. Then there is the most, there is a classic collection of hers which is titled The Moon is Always Female, that came out in 1980. Now, in this collection, The Moon is Always Female, she talks about how the lunar cycle also is working along with the female period cycle, menstruation, and she says that the moon reminds me of when my period is headed, when I'm going to ovulate. So connecting the lunar cycle with the cycle of a woman's period of ovulation and other things, suggesting, making it bodily. Suddenly something as abstract as the moon, the sky, etc., those things become material the moment she connects them with the woman's body. So I think she's, there's a lot of playful kind of work going on there. And she said about this collection that this collection, she said, speak of zucchini and oaks and cats, and of jogging and writing, of nuclear power plants and suicide, of fat and of street hassling. That's how she, it's like a jumble of all things, but that is what we deal with. So at once, she's talking about writing, jogging, zucchini, the food items, cats that you play with, and in the next breath, you have nuclear power plants and suicide. So how they are yoked together, right? How this kind of two things, one very ordinary of cats and jogging things, and the other which relates to something very political, talking about nuclear power plants and connecting it to people's suicide, right? So how these, all these disconnected things in life, street hassling. So you go the hassles of the street, everyday street, trying to bring the most ordinary things and dramatizing it in a manner that they seem to say more than what we understand about them. So I think that's the beauty of Marge Pierce's poetry also. So I'd like to take you to two poems really. One is where she's again, like in my previous lecture I talked about breaking out, which is a very where she talks about her own evolution as a writer, right? And or not just a writer but as a girl who was coming of age, connected to Barbie doll, which is also the name of the collection of her poems. Barbie doll, the poem as such was written in 1971, but then as a collection it came out in 1973. Now this is a very stark poem, very mind-boggling in fact. I'd like to read this bit. Again, the growing up years, the formative years of a girl's life that are most important to her. And I'd like to quote some section from the poem just to give you a sense of this kind of poetry of hers. She says, and I quote, "This girl child was born as usual and presented dolls that did pee-pee." Right? Now the girl child was born as usual and presented dolls that did pee-pee and miniature GE stoves and irons and wee lipsticks the color of cherry candy. Then in the magic of puberty, a classmate said, "You have a great big nose and fat legs." Do you see how it gets converted? So, talking about how girls are made conscious of their body, what they are gifted, again, one is taken back to what Simone de Beauvoir said, that when the girl is born, then she is presented with a doll, and given stoves and irons and lipsticks to play with. So you are creating the woman in her, you're creating a girl in her, you're trying to tell her that this is what you must play with. So how gender is something which is superimposed on the child, and then she assumes the identity of the girl. And in puberty, she's made to feel self-conscious about her body, so there is a lot of engagement in her with her own body and her own sexuality, as she says that she has always been asked to play it low or to always be the subdued woman. In fact, I'm reminded of another poem of his where she's talking, which is on the friend, and she says this, he asked me to cut off your hands, and I did. So in a way there is violence that she feels is that the woman is made to go through. And this kind of violence, just to give you a kind of an autobiographical note, she, when she was still studying and not even 18, she was pregnant. And at that time, abortion was still a fight, and abortion wasn't legalized in America, and she didn't know where to go. And she said the rich people just flew to Mexico or found a gynecologist to get abortions done, but I had no money and I didn't know where to go. So she said that I in frustration, because I didn't know what to do, she actually used tweezers and she bled and she thrust them in her private parts, and she tried to do an abortion herself. That's what she says in one of her interviews. And she said that, and I passed out because there was so much blood all around. But she said I became aware of the fact that this is not what I wanted, and I was rebelling against it. So this kind of violence really on the body that you see in her poetry has a lot to do with her personal suffering also. How the act of going through an abortion or itself became a kind of a memory or a trauma of that period, but it strengthened her according to her, but at the same time it left a deep impact on her person. So when she talks about this classmate who said you have great big nose and fat legs, then she's referring to the kind of how the girl is also sexualized, and is made to feel as a kind of a sexual object, which she is not aware of as a young girl maybe. So her complexes during puberty are also highlighted. And then she goes on in this same poem to say, I quote, "She was healthy, tested, intelligent, possessed strong arms and back, abundant sexual drive and manual dexterity. She went on to She went to and fro apologizing. Everyone saw a fat nose on thick legs. Again, very euphemistic and but very stark. She was advised to play coy, exhorted to come on hearty, exercise, diet, smile and wheedle. Her good nature wore out like a fan belt. So she cut off her nose and her legs and offered them up. So there's a kind of disgust, there's a kind of complete frustration with this patriarchal world where she's asked to smile, to exercise. You're never the right size, you're always smiling too much or not at all, and you're supposed to play coy, just be the shy girl. So all those gender constraints that are attached to women, and therefore this is very much a second wave feminism sort of a poem, because this is what second wave feminism talked about, how women in everyday life were subjected to this kind of censure and this kind of this kind of life that they were supposed to abide by, given the gender rules at the time, that it was not enough to have certain legal rights or formal equality, that equality and this kind of freedom had to come within culture and within society, at a more deeper level it had to be observed. So I think that is, these two poems are examples of this kind of feminist writing, and I think they define her, this kind of, a woman very much rooted in the 20th century. So that's very important, I think. This other poem that I now, any observation before we go to the next poem, which is different?
No, I'm thinking of the violence that is being presented through words, and that violence, finally spreads across the page, beyond the page, to the society in which one is living and writing this.
Yeah.
So I thought it's a very strong metaphor to expose the dissensions and the cruelties that this society has.
Yes, also, women's bodies are supposed to be asexual in that sense, or not to have any kind of, as passive. So I think what she's trying to do here is also actively give a woman to talk about her own self, but also talking about that how the body is a problem, both for men also. A woman's body is something that they can't deal with, and what do you do with that body? So her engagement with the body, in fact, is a very contemporary concern that a lot of feminists also work on. So I thought that, body, whether you take of body image, body dysmorphia, all those things, I think you find an undercurrent of all that in her poetry, no matter what she's talking about.
No, basically, I'm trying to now read this metaphor to understand the society of the time, because society is presenting a very wholesome picture to the world, and that society has inside it so much of violence as is there in the life of women. So I'm thinking of the other side, where politics, the power politics, as you use the word, is distorting facts, is distorting things in order to fit into a scheme. That is entirely antisocial.
Yeah, and in this case it is gender politics, right?
Yes.
One section of society trying to curb the rights of another section of society in a huge chunk, in this sense. Also trying to objectify the woman, not realizing that the woman is not an object, that it speaks. So and it is also it also evolves again. So you can control objects. You can control resources, so there is a kind of capitalization of that, right? But a woman, you cannot, because she's a dynamic person. So I think there is this kind of unease of the patriarchal world that she's also hinting at through these poems of hers.
Is there a common factor between the suffering of women and the suffering of the common males?
Not
poor
really.
people, those who are hungry, those who are working in the fields, working
yes,
in the factories.
as labor, yes, as labor, yes. Just as you talk about laboring. In the last poem that I read out, she says that she's seen as a woman. I'll take you to that, with manual dexterity. Right? She says abundant sexual drive and manual dexterity. Now, manual dexterity is because of a working class background. Because she's strong, arms and back. Right? And the fact that she says you have fat legs, again suggesting that she is very much a person of the real world, right? And who is strong because, or has strong arms and back because of because she has had to do a lot of manual work when she grew up, right? She was made to work in the house and work outside the house as her parents. So as she's very much a labor in that sense and not a woman in that sense. So in fact, when she says she's tested intelligence with strong arms and back, it is something that a woman is not supposed to be. She's neither supposed to be intelligent nor have strong arms and back, because then you're challenging what role does the man have. If you can pick up the heavy stuff, if you have strong arms and back, then what is the role of the man? You've taken over the masculine when you have manual dexterity. So she's also suggesting that she's critiqued for that. So I think therein I see a kind of a connection with the laboring people. And you'll see more of this in this other poem. She says it is titled To Be of Use. Okay, and this poem I'd like you to read it as well. The people I love best, she says, the people I love best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, swim off with sure strokes, almost out of sight. So the people I love best, she says, are the ones who jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, swim off with sure strokes, almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of the element, the black sleek heads of seals bouncing like half submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves. An ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. And her basic idea being, and I quote again, the work of the world is common as mud. And in fact, this is what she thinks gives us identity, right? And she says, the pitcher cries for water to carry and a person for work that is real, unquote. So you can already see that, this is what I meant, can you relate the two now? That, she's also looking at herself, and she says, I love these people who are working, and a person requires work. The kind of questions I think that we need to ask is, what does she mean by something like, I love people who harness themselves? What is the idea of harnessing? To be able to capture or to control or to accumulate some kind of energy or some kind of value or whatever you want to say, and then to be able to put it to use, like we do that, like we take the energy of sun and then we control it and then we use it. So in many ways what she means here is that she's able to humanize every section of society, and again keep them away from the field generals or talking about not the deserters, etc. So these are people who are who strain in the mud and muck to move things forward. So these are the real people in society who are doing the job and do what must be done again and again. So I think she aligns herself with this kind of these kind of people who exert, who harness themselves, are able to they just go headlong into work and become one with the element, she says. So how do you respond to this particular poem?
Oh, this is what I was looking for, and I think you've given a very fine example of the connection between the rest of the society which is deprived and women who are specifically examined and analyzed and rejected. So this makes her a poet of the entire society.
Yeah, also humanist. This is one of her humanist poems, often quoted also, because here she's talking about humanist concerns, that what brings value to life is this kind of common rhythm. When she says that the work of the world, that is the work of humanity, is common as mud. Right? What does she mean by that? That it is as common as mud. So we have to unite as humanity, the work of the world, and come together and work on that. That gives us identity as human beings. And she takes a dig at these people who pick these antique pictures and puts them, put them in museums. She says pictures are not meant for museums.
Yes.
Pictures are meant to be used. The picture cries out, cries for water to carry, because that is its job. That is what it's made for. That is what gives it meaning. And so she says a person is always looking for work that is real, because that's what people are made of. They're not supposed to rust. In museums, they're not supposed to not work, because she says real identity actually comes from work. So I think she's also giving a sense of work ethic, that work actually defines us. And work of what kind? Work of common rhythms of life, where you work till the fire is put out, and work together as one humanity. I think that is a very real, very optimistic kind of a poem that she's
And
presented
I think
here.
work and labor combine men and women
Right.
in a positive sense. And
Right.
you are using the word humanist, that as humanists, the poet is able to combine the society into unity that will finally play the role of change, the role of what you call, evolution or development and progress. So this is the positive answer that she's finally able to.
I think I found this poem very interesting also, because I thought in this poem she was able to merge both a sense of her Marxist idea with the feminist one. Because, she says here that I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go to the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along. So I think there is a desire to be a part of that kind of community and that kind of life where labor is shared equally. And everybody is a part of that process of production, where, for instance, in a kind of materialist way, she would say that why is production not social in that sense? So, talking about production that should be social and distribution at the same time that should be social. So, when she says that I want to work with people who work in a row and pass the bags along. So, there are people who work in a row. Right? It's not an individual that she's talking about. She's talking about the workers who are on a level playing field, or not level, but they're equal. So these workers in a row are passing the bags along, right? And they move in a common rhythm and produce the food together when the food must come in, right? So produce the food that is together. So I think she's building that kind of a life, whereas a woman also, she hopes and wants to be with these kind of people. Also, that maybe because she's grew up in a working class neighborhood, who had these strong people, whether they were blacks or the whites. So I think a lot has to do with her environment also, her growing up years that made her who she is.
How would you shape her in the 4 or 5 sentences? This fireball called a poet.
Yeah.
It's a woman poet, and she has so much of energy, so much of anger, and at the same time, what is called positive direction that she has to suggest for the
because
reader.
if you notice, all her poems, even if she's talking about violence, etc., even when she says, I offered them up, which is, I cut my, so the point that she's able to deal with, she says, I cut my legs and my nose and offered them up. So in a way, that violence is also a rejection. It's not submission. So there is no submission in her poetry. In the other case, she says, I will not give up, I will not be Sisyphus, and I will not be my mother, like a housewife who scrubs on raw knees.
And I will not keep a stick in society. I would like to crush it.
Yes, I would like to crush it and be with people who are engaged and enjoy with people where enjoyment is possible. Because everywhere else there is hierarchy. This last poem that I read out, To Be of Use, I mean, think of the title. What does she mean to be of use? She says that do we aspire to be of use? Is that what our real hope and aspiration in society is? We were talking about aspiration. So is that the aspiration of society, to be of use, to work? Because that will give you not just identity but also fulfillment and joy. Because that's what she says she desires to be, and work with people together, and build that kind of society.
And please give us one short comment about the titles that she gives to her poetry collections.
Yeah, I think they're very interesting. Like some of them, like, the first one is titled Breaking Camp, you know, and the poem that I read from the 1984 is called Breaking Out, you know. So I think they are very telling titles. Again, the moon is always female. Also they are very telling titles, because if you think of how language is biased, how language is so deeply patriarchal, that the strong element is always male and the weak element is always woman. You know, the moon is always female, but the sun is always male, right? The river would be seen as a feminine, in the feminine, and the ocean is male, you know. So I think there is this kind of masculine feminine divisions that we make. We don't realize what we are parceling in the head of the child, and by telling the child that because this is feminine and that is a girl is a feminine, and the feminine is the moon which draws its light from the sun, you know. So why is the moon feminine, you know, and why is the sun masculine? So in that sense, why does mankind include, you know, women in it, and why do we use pronouns such as he and he more, you know, for an individual, for that mankind, or even for man, you know, what do you by man you mean also the whole race. So I think those are the kind of questions she is able to raise through her collection, through her work. Again, Barbie doll as a symbol in itself of beauty, you know, and handing a Barbie doll to a girl who begins to aspire to be like that girl is creating that kind of gender dynamic already. So, you know, her titles are in fact as hard hitting as her poetry, I'd say that.
Friends, so much has been said by Dr. Bajaj on this poet, and it was point-wise, and she went over the themes that the poet has taken up one by one, and finally concludes, you know, that she is a humanist poet who wants to combine the labor of men and women together, and who wants to pave the way for what is called progressive development. So on this note, we come to the end of the discussion. And I'm sure you would have liked this for 2 or 3 reasons. One is that it's about the human center of society, and second, that the woman is supposed to be also a part of that center that the poet has projected. Thank you.